Hey, seventh graders, welcome to part B. Again, sorry these videos are a little late. I've been enjoying my holiday, and also I don't have a stylus, so I'm writing these with my finger, which is making my handwriting even more atrocious than it normally is. Alright, so for part B, it just sort of covers general fraction practice, stuff that you gotta know from 5th and 6th grade that have shown up a lot. One of the main things that we've reviewed a lot this year is that decimals are basically the same as fractions. They're just specific fractions that are written as tenths or hundredths or thousandths. So when you see a fraction like 5/10ths, that means that we just need to put a 5 in the tenths place. And you say these two numbers the same way, 5/10ths and 5/10ths. 7/100ths is the same idea, except now we have a 7 in the hundredths place. And I'll let you kind of figure out some of these other ones. But if you have a fraction that's not in tenths or not in hundredths, you have to first change it into a fraction that has tenths or hundredths before you can write it as a decimal. Or sometimes you can think about money, and that's sort of like a shortcut to help you figure it out. So for example, 1/4. 1/4 isn't as tenths, so we don't just write this, which would be wrong. Instead, you're thinking, okay, is 4 a factor of 10, or is 4 a factor of 100? And 4 happens to be a factor of 100 because 25 fours go into 100. So you can multiply 1/4 by 25 over 25 to get 25 hundredths. And now, since the fraction is in the hundredths, you can write it as a decimal. But you could have also just said 1/4, oh, that's the same as a quarter, that's the same as 25 cents. For this one, you're going to have to change it to tenths, just kind of a hint to help you figure it out. For 6 and 3/10ths, that's pretty much already a decimal. You just have to rewrite it. So the 6 is in the ones place, and then 3/10ths, we have to put a 3 in the tenths place. 9.5, for that one, I think of it as 9 and half of a dollar, or $9.50. So you can write this as 9 and 5/10ths, or 9 as 50/10ths, or sorry, 50 hundredths. And another way you could have thought about it is by making an equivalent fraction. So 9.5 is the same as 9 and 5/10ths, which you can write as 9.5 or 9.50. Alright, let's go over 7/8. One thing that you're going to be asked in 7th grade is to be able to take trickier fractions and write them as decimals. And the nice thing about changing a fraction to a decimal is you can always use division to find the exact answer. So 7/8 can be thought of as 7 divided by 8. I'm going to try and write this with my finger, and I apologize if this is super sloppy. But we're going to do 7 divided by 8. Now, 8 doesn't go into 7. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the 7 and add a 0 in the tens place. And I bring up my decimal on top of it. 8 goes into 70 a bunch of times, and I know that it goes in 8 times because 8 times 8 is 64. So 8 times 8 is 64. I subtract that, and I end up getting 6. Since I still have a remainder, now I'm going to put a 0 in the hundredths place, bring that guy down, and now I want to figure out how many times 8 goes into 60. And I can't do 8 times 8 because that would be 64, but I can do 8 times 7, which would be 56. 8 times 7 is 56. I subtract that, I get a 4. Looks like we're still going, so I'm going to put a 0 in the thousandths place, bring that down, and now I have 40. And now I'm happy because I know 8 goes into 40 exactly 5 times. So when I multiply that out, I end up with a remainder of 0. So long story short, thousandths is the same as 7/8. Alright, these problems are just kind of reversed, but I'll show you a few. 51 hundredths is 51 hundredths. 9 and 25 hundredths is 9 wholes and 25 hundredths. Or, if you're thinking in terms of money, it's like 9 and a quarter, or 9 and 1/4. And you can try the rest. So all this converting between fractions and decimals is really helpful with the hardest integer problems, like these on the back. You have to be able to take problems where one number is a fraction, one number is a decimal, and somehow come up with a solution. I'm going to solve this first one by changing everything into a decimal. And I have 4/10. I'm going to rewrite that as 40 hundredths. Those are equivalent. And then we're going to add -3/4, which as a decimal is the same as 3/4, so I'm going to put -75 hundredths. Then I set up a number line. Again, using my finger. Sorry. And we're adding -75 hundredths, which is the same as adding weight. So we're going to drop down here. So I went down 40 hundredths, which means I still have 35 hundredths left over. And that's one way to get the answer, and one form of the answer. If you wrote it in terms of fractions, I think your answer probably would have been this, -7/20ths, which is also correct. Alright, and I'll show one more, and you have to do the last two on your own if you're just kind of watching these. This time I'm going to change everything into fraction. So I have -55 hundredths, I'm just going to write as -55 over 100. Then minus -2/5, but instead of writing it as 2/5, I need to make the denominators the same. So I just got to figure out 2/5 in hundredths. I know that 5 times 2 is 10, so that means that 5 times 20 is 100, and 2 times 20 is 40. So that means I can rewrite -2/5 as -40 hundredths. Now I see this problem and I ask myself, are we going up or down? And since we're subtracting weights, the house gets lighter. We're actually going up in this problem. So we're starting at -55 hundredths. And we're going up 40 hundredths. Now, because 40 isn't as big as 55, I know we're actually not going to pass 0. We're going to get close to it, but we're not going to pass it. As we get closer to 0, the numbers get smaller and smaller. So I think to myself, 55 minus 40 is 15. And that's why the answer is -15 hundredths. Guys, for these last two, if you've been just sort of following me, try these on your own. Make a choice. Fractions, decimals, change it to that. Use a number line, and see if you're able to figure it out. And I'll see you for the next video.